Now, as we all know, Super Mario 64 is an absolute classic. It was the very first 3D Super Mario game and set a ton of the standards. Thanks to this, Nintendo eventually remade the game, but this time for a more handy console that could be used everywhere, the Nintendo DS. But while developing this game and adding new things to it as well, they had some test runs, and certain elements were changed at some point or even removed. So what did they throw away then? Well, we are going to find out today. Now, to start off, we will look at one of the most crucial things when it comes to creating a game. A way of testing all the features that you've created, or certain objects, or power-ups, or anything really. I'm talking about the test room. In this place, you can turn into any of the characters seen in the final game, and you can use them to test all kinds of aspects seen in the final game. For example, can a character walk up a slope normally without glitching or bugging? Can they use certain power-ups to break certain objects without any problems occurring? Do the power-ups themselves even work properly so you can actually use them effectively in the game? Heck, there are even some enemies in this map. Clearly, there are a lot of different things found in this particular map that isn't seen in the final game and was never meant for the final game. The only reason why Nintendo ever created it was to test all kinds of elements that should end up in the final build. That's also why there are almost no textures at all. It didn't matter really. It wasn't going to be in the final game. The public isn't supposed to see this, like ever. The reason why they found this was just looking through the files. Nobody was supposed to be in here at all except for the developers, so they didn't bother giving certain things textures or making it look nice at all. It's just a room filled with all kinds of different objects, items, and other things, all closely put together, so you can quickly go between them and test certain elements to see if they finally work. It's quite crazy to see, to be honest. And while it wasn't supposed to be in the final game, it's still really fun to mess around in. But sadly enough, it was never meant for the public. However, this isn't the only test map found in the game. It is known as the Onumasu test map. Here, you won't see all kinds of different objects, power-ups, blocks, terrain types, and whatnot. But this time, it's just one singular enemy that's being tested. Well, I'm not completely sure if I would call it an enemy, because it could also be labeled as a hazard, because Onumasu means Toxbox. Those are the big boxes that go around the place in the desert level found in the game, which can be a gigantic pain if you get squashed by one of them. Now, what this test level is just a gigantic flat surface with no texture at all, and a bunch of these just going all over the place in seemingly quite random patterns. I'm not sure how you were supposed to test these in this map, but it certainly looks interesting. And unlike anything seen in the final game. If you want, you can even walk off the ledge and fall into oblivion. Because like I said before, these weren't meant for the public, so Nintendo didn't really care if some elements weren't finished. As long as the thing they were testing worked, then everything was fine. Also, I don't really know why Nintendo made a test map specifically for them. Why didn't they include them in the first one I mentioned? I guess that will remain a mystery. Although one answer I can think of is that they would take up too much space. Now, another thing I want to talk about is Peach's room, because there are two versions of them. The new one seen in Super Mario 64 DS, which is slightly different, and the original from the N64 game. In Super Mario 64, the room containing the Princess Secret Slide is a small hexagonal room with a sign and 3 stained glass windows of Peach. The DS remake replaced this with a much larger room in a separate map with the sign, 2 stained glass windows, with one on the right warping to the slide, doors that allow you to swap characters, and a door going to Peach's rec room. But despite all of this, the original is still a part of the castle model, complete with the sign and secret slide warp, though most of the textures are incorrect and it doesn't have any collision. So it's really similar to the one seen in the N64 game, but it isn't really finished. A lot of elements and little things are missing. Just look at the walls once and you can see that there is a lot wrong in this room. But hey, the warp point still works, so from a technical standpoint it's fine. fine. Now again, it's a bit weird that this is even in the game. It could be that Nintendo originally wanted to recreate this room and use it in the DS remake as well, not changing anything. But in the end, that was scrapped. Another option is that they used a build of Super Mario 64, the original, to build this entire game. Another option is that they used the original Super Mario 64 to make this DS version. This is also what happened with Ocarina of Time 3DS. Grezzo told all of us that they made the game from scratch and that they're so good at it that even some of the bugs returned, but in reality they just used the N64 game to rebuild it on the 3DS. That's why a lot of things are similar to it. All they did was change some things here and there and fix some of the bugs. So maybe Nintendo also did this, grabbing the original and using that as a base in order to remake the game, but this time for a new console with some added features and better graphics. Now, before we move away from all kinds of different areas and rooms, I want to look at one last thing. An unseen chunk that's floating in the middle of nowhere, out of sight and out of mind. Because outside the entrance to the Big Boo Battle Room is a great chunk just floating there. It is made from 3 triangles and serves no purpose at all. There's even no collision mapped where it's positioned. So the developers probably put it there and kind of forgot about it. It wasn't intentional and probably a little mistake. Now let's move on to our next little subject, unused objects and enemies. The first thing we will look at is something called cap blocks, which we have also seen in the test rooms that I mentioned before. Because the game contains 3 MLW blocks that will give the corresponding characters caps when hit. Now, all of this works perfectly. However, for some reason, they aren't used in the game. Even the ones that we see in the test levels work absolutely fine. The only time when it doesn't release anything is when you haven't unlocked the character. Besides that, it will always release the cap and it will always completely work, turning you in whatever character you chose. Now, the reason why they didn't end up in the game or were basically scrapped is quite logical. They were only and specifically used for testing and nothing else really. That's also why they are found in the test level, because in the game you just have doors that you need to go through in order to switch characters. So as you can imagine, they were only used for beta and alpha testing because they were very handy for that. And if you would actually put them in the final game, then it probably wouldn't look as nice. Now let's move on to our next thing, the multiplayer stairs and barrier. The multiplayer Peach's Castle features direct reproductions of the stair and barrier objects as part of the level model. Therefore, the separate objects are unused. However, it could be that they actually made them separately and just put them together in the end, although we can't be sure about this. Or they just made separate objects out of them so they can put them in test levels, in order to find out if everything functions alright. To be honest, either of these two are the most likely options, although only Nintendo can really give us an answer.
Also, there is another scrapped enemy, and that enemy is the Red Koopa. That Koopa's behavior was actually quite different from the regular Koopa's ones. It was actually fully complete and was left out of the game for no apparent reason. This Koopa's behavior was fairly aggressive compared to the normal one. It didn't run away unlike the normal one and rather focused on attacking Mario. Even when it got knocked out of its shell, it still prioritized attacking Mario rather than obtaining its shell again. And also, you couldn't even surf on its shell afterwards, even though that would have looked fairly cool to be honest. Instead, you could punch that shell and use it as a projectile to attack other enemies, and this is probably where it got cut out at the end. Enemies in this game were fairly easy to deal with anyways, so a projectile wouldn't be too useful after all. The behavior of the red shell makes sense though, because if you look at Mario Kart, that was actually one of the most aggressive items there is. So maybe that was where its behavior came from, but we can't be sure. Another model that wasn't seen in the final game is the Goomba low poly model. Normally, low poly models are used to render enemies or objects from far away in order to save resources. This is called level of detail. But it went unused for the Goomba as there probably aren't many Goombas on the screen at any time anyways, so it went unused because there weren't as many Goombas as they anticipated in the beginning. The entire concept of having low poly models, however, is still used on objects such as coins and other things. So we can't really say that it's a shame that that one didn't get in because apparently the DS could handle it anyways. And another little graphic that got cut is the 5-star door icon. This one goes unused because there just isn't a door that requires 5 stars for you to enter it. While the original one didn't have a 5-star door or anything like that, it's kind of confusing that they introduced it in the first place or attempted to introduce it. But then again, SM64 DS changed so many things over the original one, it wouldn't really be that big of an issue to add such a minor detail in the end.
Hey you there, thank you for watching this lovely video. I hope you enjoyed it. Now be sure to click the subscribe button and the bell button so you won't miss anything in the future. Leave a like and a comment because that helps out. And check out more videos. Thank you.